I never imagined my own sister would accuse me of stealing her wedding money and watch the entire family turn against me before I could even breathe. One moment I was the maid of honor, the next I was the villain everyone decided to believe. In that instant, something inside me cracked, not from the accusation itself, but from the certainty in their eyes, as if they had been waiting for a reason to push me out. I'm Bethany Reed, and that night marked a line I never thought I'd have to draw. I didn't fight back. I didn't beg them to listen. I just stood there, realizing how quickly loyalty dissolves when someone louder points a finger. The shock came in waves. First disbelief, then anger, then the unsettling clarity that the truth alone would never save me. Not with a family that needed a scapegoat more than they needed answers. But something else happened in that moment. Something none of them noticed. While they condemned me, I started connecting pieces that never made sense before. The looks, the whispers, the sudden tension around my grandmother's decisions. It felt as if the accusation wasn't the beginning of a problem, but the end of a plan I hadn't seen coming. 3 days later, I walked into a family dinner with a quiet resolve and a single video that would shatter every lie they had wrapped themselves in. What happened in that room changed far more than their opinion of me. It changed the entire direction of my life. Before I reveal what happened when the truth finally hit the table, tell me, what time is it where you're watching this? And from which part of the world? I genuinely want to know how far this story will reach next. Earlier that week, I had woken up thinking the day would be simple, predictable, and maybe even joyful. I had spent months helping my sister prepare for her wedding, and by the time Saturday arrived, I thought I knew exactly how the day would unfold. I was wrong, but that realization didn't come until much later. That morning, all I felt was the strange mixture of pride and exhaustion that came with being the maid of honor. Chelsea Reed looked flawless from the moment she stepped into the bridal suite. I watched her pace around the room, adjusting her veil, asking me to check her hair, handing me lists of things she wanted done before the ceremony started. I kept track of her bouquet, her makeup bag, and the emergency kit she insisted she needed nearby. As chaotic as she was, I still believed it meant something that she trusted me to keep everything together. I moved through the vineyard venue like someone trying to hold a dozen threads in both hands. The coordinator sent me updates. The caterer asked questions. The DJ needed the revised order of speeches, and every single person seemed to look at me when something needed fixing. I kept telling myself it would be worth it once Chelsea walked down the aisle. I wanted the ceremony to feel effortless for her, even if it meant I was running around in uncomfortable shoes all morning. When the ceremony finally began, I stood to the side with the bouquet in my hands, reminding myself to breathe. Watching Chelsea step onto the path, escorted by our father, I felt something tighten in my chest. Not jealousy, not resentment, just a quiet hope that maybe the day would bring us closer. For a moment, everything truly did feel perfect. Guests laughed, glasses clinked, music filled the courtyard, and the reception glowed under string lights that made the entire scene feel unreal. My main job during the reception was managing the gift table and the adjoining room where guests dropped off cards and envelopes. I had labeled boxes, arranged the table, and made sure no one wandered into the space who didn't belong there. Near the end of the night, I stepped into the gift room one last time to check the door, count the remaining cards, and confirm the staff would secure it after the event. Nothing looked out of place. I locked the door, handed the key to the venue coordinator, and walked out believing everything was accounted for. After the guests left, our immediate family drove to my parents' house for a small after-wedding gathering. I was tired but proud of how smoothly the day had gone. I expected conversation about the ceremony, the vows, the food, maybe even a comment about how well I handled the chaos. Instead, the shift happened with a speed I still struggle to process. Chelsea entered the dining room with a strange stillness around her. and the mood tightened before I even understood why. I noticed the way her breathing changed and the way my mother straightened her shoulders, as if preparing for impact. The words came fast, too fast for my brain to keep up. I remember watching her lips move, her hands tremble, and her expression sharpen into something cold and rehearsed. She announced that the wedding fund, the envelopes, the cards, the cash everyone had contributed, had vanished. I waited for the explanation, for the next detail that would clarify what she meant. But the next thing she said gutted the room. She claimed I was the only person with access to the gift room and that the money was gone because of me. The silence that followed carried more weight than the accusation itself. My father's stare hardened. My mother's disappointment surfaced instantly, and the space between us morphed into something unrecognizable. I tried to speak, but the room had already made its decision. They didn't argue. They didn't ask questions. They clung to her story as if it had already been proven. The pain wasn't in their anger. It was in how easily they accepted a version of me I had never been. I walked out of the house that night without raising my voice. My phone buzzed as I closed the car door. Chelsea had posted a message in the family group chat, painting me as someone who betrayed her on the most important day of her life. By the time I reached my apartment, half the family had blocked me. The rest simply stayed silent, which felt worse. That night, I finally understood what it meant to have the floor pulled out from under me without warning. The wedding I worked so hard for had turned into the first step in a disaster I never saw coming. By the next morning, a numb heaviness settled over me, the kind that made everything feel slightly out of place. I moved around my apartment without direction, trying to understand how a single accusation had shifted the ground under my feet. Nothing made sense, and the silence from my family only deepened the confusion. I kept waiting for someone to call and say there had been a mistake, but the hours passed without a single message. I didn't know what I expected, but it wasn't the growing realization that they might actually believe everything Chelsea said. The first person to reach out wasn't my parents. It was my grandmother, Helen Reed, calling in her usual calm tone, though something fragile hid underneath it. Hearing her voice sent an ache through my chest I wasn't ready for. She didn't scold me. She didn't accuse me. She simply asked if I felt well enough to talk for a moment. The pause before her next question told me she already feared the answer. When she finally spoke, her words landed with a weight that tightened my throat. She asked if I could promise her I hadn't taken the wedding money. I could hear the hesitation she tried to hide. It wasn't anger. It was uncertainty, the kind that grows when someone is torn between what they know about you and what they've been told. The idea that my grandmother, the one person who had always believed in me, now questioned whether I might have done something so reckless made my stomach twist. I reassured her as best I could, but the damage was already there. I recognized it in the quiet exhale she released before ending the call. After hanging up, I sat still for a long time, replaying her voice. Something in the way she phrased her question triggered a memory I had buried months ago, one that cast an entirely different shadow over the situation. My grandmother had once confided in me about her estate plans, telling me she intended to leave me the majority of her assets because she felt I was responsible and stable. She loved my sister, but she never hid her concerns about the way Chelsea handled money. At the time, it felt like a private moment between us, not something with consequences. Now, it resurfaced with new meaning. A second memory followed, one of Chelsea standing at the bottom of the staircase months earlier, listening to part of a conversation she wasn't meant to hear. She hadn't said anything to me that day, but her expression had hardened the moment she realized our grandmother's intentions. She treated me differently after that, as if I had taken something from her despite having no control over any of it. I pushed the thought away back then, not wanting to read too much into her moods. But the way she looked at me last night, the ease with which she pointed a finger, made everything click together like pieces of a puzzle I had ignored. The accusation no longer felt random, it felt calculated. Once the idea took hold, it spread quickly. Chelsea didn't just accuse me, she did it publicly, decisively, and in a moment when no one expected conflict. She had framed the story in a way that left little room for doubt. The wedding fund wasn't just money, it was symbolic. Losing it cast a shadow large enough to obscure anything else, including my grandmother's future decisions. I wasn't dealing with an impulsive reaction. I was dealing with intent. I needed clarity. I also needed someone who wasn't emotionally entangled in the Reed family. Without thinking twice, I grabbed my keys and drove to see Lena Morales, the only person I trusted to give me a straightforward perspective. She opened her door before I even knocked, taking one look at my expression before ushering me inside. I didn't know how to express the mess in my chest, so I started with the simplest version of the truth. Chelsea accused me, my family believed her, and I had no idea how to make sense of any of it. Lena listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back and crossed her arms with a look that suggested she was already working through possibilities. She considered the wedding venue, my responsibilities during the reception, and the room where the gifts had been stored. She asked who had access, who handled the key, and how the staff monitored the area. Her focus was sharp, almost investigative, and it steadied me more than I expected. Then she said something that shifted everything again. The gift room had cameras. Security footage existed. If someone else went into that room after I left, the camera would have caught it. If nothing happened, that would at least confirm that no one entered with my knowledge. Either way, I needed to see that footage. The idea created a spark inside me, fragile but real. The first sense of direction I'd had since the accusation. By the time I left Lena's apartment, the numbness that had followed me since the wedding had begun to crack. I didn't have answers yet, but I finally had a place to start looking. The next morning carried a clarity I hadn't felt in days. It wasn't confidence yet, just the sense that something important needed to be confronted instead of avoided. I left my apartment earlier than usual and drove toward the vineyard venue, following the route I had memorized during the wedding preparations. My hands tightened around the steering wheel, though the tension came from anticipation rather than dread. I kept reminding myself that information was the only thing I truly had left. Information and whatever resolve was still holding me together. When I arrived, the parking lot was mostly empty, and a calm stillness hung over the buildings. I walked toward the main office with a purpose that felt strange after a weekend spent unraveling. The assistant manager recognized me immediately, offering a polite greeting while glancing at the clipboard in her hands. I explained that I needed to speak with the person in charge of operations. A few minutes later, the venue's manager appeared and welcomed me into a small office filled with binders, event schedules, and security monitors. Her tone remained professional, though I sensed a lingering curiosity about why I had shown up so soon after the wedding. I asked if we could review footage from the night of the reception, specifically the hallway near the gift room. I didn't elaborate on my reasons. I simply said there was a concern about access to the space. The manager hesitated only briefly before nodding and turning toward the row of screens. She pulled up the archived files, navigating through timestamps until she located the hours surrounding the reception's end. I watched her fast forward through footage of guests leaving, staff cleaning tables, and vendors packing equipment. When the moment I needed finally appeared, I felt an involuntary shiver run through me. The footage showed me locking the gift room door, handing the key to the coordinator, and walking away. Nothing unusual, nothing questionable, but the video did not end there. A later timestamp revealed Chelsea Reed returning to the area with someone I recognized only faintly, Scott Palmer, a man I had seen around her circles but never close enough to understand their connection. I leaned closer as the manager slowed the footage. Chelsea glanced over her shoulder before taking the key. Scott slid discreetly from his jacket. She unlocked the door, stepped inside with him, and disappeared for several minutes. When they re-emerged, Scott tucked several envelopes into his coat while Chelsea adjusted her dress with a practiced calm. Her expression lacked any trace of concern. She moved with the certainty of someone executing a plan they had rehearsed. The manager asked if I needed a copy. I nodded, though I struggled to find my voice. My mind raced, not from shock, but from the confirmation of something I had begun to suspect. I requested footage from the exterior hallway as well. Another angle showed Chelsea and Scott laughing softly as they walked toward the rear exit, stopping briefly while Chelsea handed him something I couldn't see clearly. Their comfort with each other carried an intimacy that made the room feel smaller. I asked if there were any cameras near the staff entrance outside. The manager checked, then shook her head. Still, the footage she provided felt like more than evidence. It felt like the beginning of the truth unfolding in front of me. She transferred the files onto a drive and handed it to me, wishing me luck with whatever situation required this kind of review. I thanked her, though gratitude felt inadequate for the magnitude of what she had unknowingly given me. I left the venue and sat in my car for a long moment, letting the quiet surround me. The images played again in my mind without the need for a screen. Chelsea entering the gift room, Scott following without hesitation, the envelopes hidden beneath his coat. Every detail replaced a piece of doubt with something sharper than anger. I now had proof that my sister had orchestrated a narrative designed to destroy my credibility, one she knew would be accepted without question. Later that evening, a thought pushed me toward another step. If Chelsea and Scott were willing to enter the gift room together, there might be other moments where their connection surfaced more openly, moments I hadn't noticed because I had never imagined looking for them. I drove toward the business complex where Chelsea worked, unsure of what I hoped to find, but unwilling to ignore the possibility of more answers. I parked across the street and waited, watching employees filter out of the building. Then I saw her. Chelsea exited through the side door and walked toward the far corner of the lot. Scott appeared from behind a row of cars. They approached each other with a familiarity that removed any remaining doubt. He leaned in close, and the two shared a moment that revealed a deeper bond than anything implied by a simple professional acquaintance. I recorded enough to understand the truth fully, not for revenge yet, but because the reality unfolding in front of me required documentation. As I watched them part ways, the remaining pieces of the puzzle slid into place without resistance. Whatever I had believed about my sister's motivations had only been scratching the surface. When I drove away, I carried something I hadn't felt since the accusation: direction. By the time I returned home that night, the exhaustion carried a sharper edge. I kept replaying the footage in my mind as if repetition might dilute the shock, but it only made the images more vivid. Still, I hadn't decided what to do with the evidence. The truth mattered, but timing mattered more, and the situation had already spiraled in a direction I hadn't chosen. I forced myself to sleep, knowing the next day would demand clarity I wasn't sure I had yet. The following afternoon, I received an unexpected message from Ryan Porter, asking if he could stop by for a moment. I hesitated before agreeing, unsure of what he wanted or whether he too believed Chelsea without question. When he arrived, he stood stiffly in the doorway, carrying the weight of someone who had spent days trying to reconcile too many conflicting stories. I let him inside, unsure of how to navigate the distance that had grown between us since the wedding. He didn't accuse me or offer excuses for Chelsea. Instead, he asked a direct question: whether I had seen anything unusual the night of the reception. His voice carried exhaustion rather than suspicion, and something about that softened the tension in my shoulders. I told him there were things he needed to see for himself, though I avoided mentioning specifics. The truth would speak more loudly through images than through anything I could describe, and I wasn't ready to shape his reaction before giving him all the facts. We sat in my living room while I loaded the files onto my laptop. I didn't speak while the footage played. Ryan leaned forward with both hands clasped, eyes fixed on the screen as the sequence unfolded. me locking the gift room, handing the key to the coordinator, and walking away. Nothing shocking there. But the moment Chelsea appeared beside Scott Palmer, the air in the room shifted. Ryan pressed his hand against his forehead, as if bracing for impact. When the two entered the gift room together and re-emerged with Scott tucking envelopes into his coat, Ryan let out a breath that carried disbelief and resignation in equal measure. He asked me to play it again. I did. He watched every detail, absorbing each second with a focus that revealed exactly how much he had already feared something wasn't right. When the video ended, he didn't speak immediately. He stared at the blank screen, his jaw tightening before he finally said he had suspected Chelsea was hiding something, but never imagined she would involve someone else in a situation this destructive. I didn't know how to respond, so I stayed quiet. He asked if there was more, and I nodded before opening the clips I had recorded outside her office building. This time, his reaction was sharper. Watching Chelsea and Scott together in that parking lot stripped away the last pieces of denial he had been holding on to. His face hardened with a pain he tried to conceal but couldn't suppress. He asked if I had shown these files to anyone else. I told him no. For several minutes he remained silent, processing everything unfolding in front of him. Then he admitted that the wedding money had become a point of tension even before the ceremony. Chelsea had insisted on a higher budget, claiming she deserved a celebration that reflected her effort. Ryan had tried to compromise because he wanted peace, but he sensed something manipulative in her tone that he couldn't articulate at the time. Now, witnessing the footage, he saw the pattern that had been there all along. He apologized, not just for doubting me, but for the way the entire family had turned so quickly without asking questions. I didn't know what to do with the apology. I appreciated it, but gratitude felt too simple for the complexity of what had happened. I told him the apology belonged to the truth, not to me personally. Ryan gave a small nod, understanding more than my words revealed. Before leaving, he asked if he could have a copy of the footage. I agreed, though I reminded him that timing mattered and that confronting Chelsea without a plan might only escalate the situation. Ryan said he wasn't thinking about retaliation. He simply needed clarity before making decisions about his future. There was a steadiness in his voice that hadn't been there earlier, as though the truth had given him direction even as it broke something open inside him. When he walked out, I felt an unexpected shift. The evidence no longer sat on my shoulders alone. Someone else finally understood the magnitude of what Chelsea had done, not just to me, but to everyone who had trusted her. For the first time since the accusation, the weight of isolation began to lift. The following morning arrived with a stillness that felt almost deliberate, as if the world had paused just long enough for me to realize how isolated everything had become. I reached for my phone out of habit, half expecting a call from someone willing to ask for the truth. Instead, the silence continued uninterrupted, leaving a space that felt heavier with every passing minute. The absence itself became an answer. My family had chosen to stand by Chelsea without reconsidering anything. A few hours later, notifications filled my lock screen like a slow-moving tide. It was the family group chat, a place that once carried birthday messages, holiday plans, and endless banter. Now it had turned into a funnel for accusations. Angela Reed, my mother, wrote long messages praising Chelsea's strength for enduring such betrayal. Thomas Reed, my father, added that the family must protect each other, though the implication excluded me entirely. Chelsea responded in clipped, dramatic comments that painted her as wounded, courageous, and unfairly burdened by the situation. I didn't reply. Every sentence they typed could have been a room with closed doors. It was strange how quickly love could be rewritten when a loud enough lie entered the picture. And stranger still, how none of them considered that Chelsea might have motives deeper than her performance of heartbreak. I watched as cousins, aunts, uncles, and distant relatives offered sympathy without hesitation. They didn't know the truth, but they trusted whatever narrative came delivered in Chelsea's voice. By midday, she posted again, this time implying that I was avoiding accountability, which only amplified the reaction of the group. People began uninvited lectures about responsibility and loyalty, speaking as though they had witnessed the wedding fund vanishing with their own eyes. My phone buzzed nonstop, and every vibration chipped away at something I didn't know I still had left. I muted the conversation, unable to watch the flood of assumptions grow into something monstrous. Despite the noise, one presence remained notably quiet: Ryan Porter. His silence felt intentional, as though he was working through his own understanding of what he had seen the day before. I didn't expect him to defend me, not after everything he was going through, but his silence was the only neutral space left in the entire family circle. By late afternoon, I realized something important. If I waited for the truth to reveal itself naturally, Chelsea would continue shaping the story until there was nothing left of my reputation. She wasn't simply accusing me, she was engineering a narrative designed to make reconciliation impossible. If I wanted to reclaim anything, my voice, my dignity, my place in the family, I needed to confront her manipulation directly. The idea came quietly but solidified quickly. I needed to call a family dinner, not for apologies, not for sympathy, for clarity. It wasn't a plan for revenge, not yet. It was a step toward closing the space between her manufactured storyline and the truth I carried. I opened the muted group chat and typed a short message, the kind that offered neither defense nor explanation. I wrote that I wanted to meet at my parents' house for dinner the next evening and that I had something important to share. I kept the tone calm, firm, and free of emotion. The responses came fast. My mother asked if this meant I was finally ready to do the right thing. My father wrote that he expected honesty because the family had been more than patient. Chelsea answered with a single line drenched in mock sincerity, implying she hoped I was prepared to take responsibility in front of everyone. I didn't respond to any of them. Then Ryan sent a separate message, not in the group chat, but directly to me. It contained only one word. Okay. Nothing more, nothing less. His restraint told me he was preparing for whatever the dinner might reveal, and I appreciated the simplicity of his response more than I expected. That evening, I backed up the footage onto multiple drives. I organized the clips, labeled each file, and printed still images that captured the key moments. It wasn't fear driving my preparation, it was certainty. Certainty that evidence would speak cleaner than any emotional plea ever could. I placed everything into a folder and set it beside my laptop, feeling a steadiness settle into place. For the rest of the night, I moved through my apartment slowly, grounding myself in the familiar rhythm of routine. I didn't rehearse what I would say. I didn't script the order of events. I only knew that the next evening would shift the balance that Chelsea had tried so hard to control. Whatever came after would be its own storm, but for the first time since the accusation, I finally felt ready to stand in the center of it. The next evening arrived with a tension that felt almost structured, as though every hour leading to the dinner had been designed to test how steady I could remain. I drove to my parents' house without rushing, keeping my focus tight so I wouldn't let anticipation distort the purpose of the night. When I stepped inside, the air carried a polite stiffness, the kind families use when they're holding their breath while pretending everything is fine. I kept my folder close, not out of fear, but because the truth needed a physical place to rest until the moment came. Everyone was already gathered around the dining table. Angela Reed avoided my eyes, keeping her hands folded in a way that signaled judgment rather than concern. Thomas Reed shifted his posture with the discomfort of someone preparing for a confession that wasn't his. And Chelsea sat near the head of the table, untouched confidence wrapped around her like a shield she believed couldn't be pierced. Ryan Porter was the only one who looked directly at me, steady and intentional. I didn't sit right away. Instead, I placed my laptop on the table and opened the folder beside it. The room sharpened around me, every movement slowing into a silence that demanded clarity. I told them I wouldn't defend myself with explanations or emotions. I would simply show them what they had refused to consider. Before anyone could interrupt, I selected the first file and pressed play. The footage began with the hallway outside the gift room. I stepped aside so the screen was visible to everyone. They watched me lock the door, hand the key to the coordinator, and walk away. No one reacted at first. Then the timestamp moved forward, and the second figure appeared. Chelsea Reed, glancing around with a caution that contradicted every claim she had made. My mother inhaled sharply when Scott Palmer stepped into view beside her. Thomas stiffened. Ryan leaned back, stunned but unsurprised. Chelsea's composure cracked only briefly before she tried to force the expression back into place. But the footage moved on without waiting for her, showing Chelsea unlocking the door, stepping inside with Scott, and emerging with envelopes concealed within his coat. I didn't narrate, I didn't comment. The silence did the work. Next, I opened the exterior clip, the one from her office parking lot. The image of Chelsea and Scott meeting with easy familiarity drained the last remnants of disbelief from the room. When it ended, I closed the laptop and let the stillness settle again. My father spoke first, though his words wavered. He asked if the footage was real. I handed him the printed stills, along with the time-stamped files, maintaining a calm he didn't seem prepared for. My mother struggled to form a question, her certainty unraveling faster than she could hide. Ryan didn't speak. He didn't need to. The truth had already reshaped every assumption he'd carried. Chelsea finally reacted, reaching for her old confidence, insisting the videos didn't reflect the full story. She tried to imply that circumstances had been misunderstood, that Scott had been helping her with something innocent, that I was twisting events for revenge. But no one echoed her this time. Every attempt to justify the footage collapsed under the weight of her earlier accusations. Thomas stood and told her she owed the family an explanation. Angela demanded to know why she had lied so boldly. Chelsea faltered, offering disjointed reasons that contradicted each other, revealing panic beneath every word she tried to control. And for the first time in years, I saw her slip out of the role she had perfected. I told them I wasn't there to repair anything. The damage done by their willingness to believe the worst of me couldn't be reversed with one night of truth. I had brought the evidence because I refused to let someone else script my identity. Not anymore. I informed them that after this evening, I would be stepping back permanently. I wasn't cutting them off as punishment. I was choosing peace after years of chaos I hadn't created. Ryan approached me as I gathered my things. He thanked me again and said he was filing for an annulment. He needed to rebuild his life without deception holding it together. He walked out shortly after, leaving Chelsea stunned in the chair she had once used as her throne. I left without waiting for more reactions. Outside, the air felt cleaner than it had in weeks. My future no longer hinged on their acceptance or their silence. It rested on my willingness to protect myself. In the months that followed, Chelsea's reputation unraveled. Word spread about the footage, and she struggled to maintain friendships or stability. Scott vanished from her life. My parents attempted occasional contact, messages filled with regret rather than responsibility. But I kept distance where healing required space. I started building my own life again, calmer, clearer, and no longer defined by someone else's narrative. Before I end this story, let me ask you something. If you were in my place, would you have walked away too, or stayed to fight for a family that didn't fight for you? Thanks for listening, and I genuinely love to hear your thoughts.